Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the George S. and Dolores Doré Eccles Foundation and the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund.
Tonight on the Hinckley Report, leaders and citizens prepare for a dramatic legislative session. How will they manage a historic budget surplus? What controversial bills will come to the forefront? And how will new leadership make their mark? In Washington, leaders work to reopen the government. What will it take to break through the impasse? How are Utahns being impacted? And what is our delegation doing to end the shutdown?
Good evening, and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry, director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have Maura Carabello, president of the Exoro Group, Frank Pignanelli, political commentator and lobbyist with Foxley and Pignanelli, and Jasen Lee, journalist with the Deseret News and host of the Voices of Reason podcast. So glad to have you all here with us, and this is an exciting time. The legislative session starts this Monday. We're ready for it. You all have been doing your exercises, getting ready. Right. I want to talk about some of the legislation coming down the line. Maura, I want to start with you because you have been so involved in the initiative process. One of the bills that people are talking about this week is Representative Thurston talking about changing the process itself. And I want to talk about two components. One in particular, the clerks posting the names of everyone who signs the petition and takes their names off of the petition, putting it all online for everyone to see. Talk about why that provision's there and some of the implications.
Sure. I mean, first, I think I really appreciate that the legislature is being thoughtful about the initiative process. One of the things I think we need to watch for as they have their discussion is that there's not unfunded mandates, if you will. I mean, it's a big burden for the clerks to do this in real time, and it's a service that we need. But I'm a little concerned that they have the means to do it. And I think that Utah, with the exception of Wyoming, Utah has the highest threshold, the highest bar to go on the initiatives. And I think most of us agree we need that. We don't want to be a California-driven state. And yet at the same time, I think it's fair to be a little suspect that some solutions actually might be burdensome to the initiative process. I would encourage the representatives to really include people who have run initiatives. You saw that a little with the Count My Vote experience that they had, in which there's some practical lessons learned. I like the direction. I'm wondering about the practicality of some of it. Okay,
Frank, you've worked on these also a bit, and let's talk about the second provision, see if how this dovetails with what Maura was saying, because there's usually a 30-day period where you can go knock names off the list. And the Count My Vote proponents were saying this is kind of a treasure map of names. Just go knock these names off the list, and that can kill a proposition there. What implications will that have if?
Well, what will happen is do the little trick that Maura did, which is you just drop the names at the end and not give anyone a chance to have that discussion. I believe in the initiative process, but I believe in it because it provides an opportunity for the people to bring something forward, to have it passed into law. But you need to have the discussion. You need to have people on the other side have a discussion with those who signed the petition. I've been involved in the initiative process, and when you develop that initiative, you're in a vacuum, and so there are legitimate arguments on the other side of any initiative, and the people who may have signed a petition, I can tell you when they sign it, they haven't heard those other arguments, and they need to hear it. They need to be given an opportunity to take the name off or to keep their name on.
And so the answer for you is government mandates and not sort of exposure to the voter? Because the premise of that is that the person who signed the petition didn't have the wherewithal or the knowledge that they needed to sign that petition.
I would say they didn't have. No, I would say the person that solicited their signature said, "This is would you like to sign this?" May not have had all the facts. They're entitled to all the facts, and the only way they're going to get it is once they've signed it, it's been posted, and someone has a chance to go talk to them. Yeah. Because if you believe in your position, you believe that it would withstand scrutiny.
And we should be reminded that the initiative process is to put something on the ballot to have a public discussion about whether they want to vote for it.
But I also believe whoever signs a petition has the right to receive information from both sides, and they're not getting that at the time they're signing it. Now, they can have the right to sign it.
Either, and so what I would be concerned about is, as you say, you want people to have both sides of any argument. However, you don't want people to be pressured to say, well, you thought you were voting for this, but this is what's happening. Because at some point, it's incumbent upon the voter or the person who signs a petition to become more informed about whatever it is they're signing up for. However, you don't want, one side pushing a lot of effort into saying, we're going to do what we can to quash this initiative.
Well, you can't tell me that the 150,000 people who signed any of those initiatives looked at the whole thing. I've been there. I've seen that. Do you want to help poor people get Medicaid? Great. They sign it. I mean, let's be honest. There's not that discussion. You have to have a discussion. I agree with the initiative process, but provide an opportunity to have the discussion.
Well, what do you think, Maura, about this great point Jason put up? When my name goes online, I am now on record. It used to be I'd sign it. No one would really know about that, unless they really did some work. But now all my neighbors go on, they take a look at it, and they say, well, I can't believe they signed that. All right, what kind of impact do you think that will have? Does that increase the transparency, the willingness to actually understand, like Frank says?
No, I think, does it increase transparency or does it politicize issues? And that's what, I mean, what is that dialogue that we're ideally seeking? The other thing it brings into the process, which I think the Lieutenant Governor has a really thoughtful plan about, is electronic signatures in general, and the ability to electronically vote, and the ability to have that dialogue using modern technology. And I would expect that if we're going to modernize the initiative process, we should also modernize the voting process and have that larger discussion. But I tend to think that mandates tend to insert politics. I don't know that they insert policy.
So, Jason, one more point on this, because these changes are coming about after we had several of these things passed, which has not been a ton, but since 1960, we had only 9 of these things actually pass. So are they really concerned about the number? Do you think this is a reaction to a couple of big ones on Medicaid expansion and marijuana?
And my answer is yes, I do, because we're finding out that at least people in some of the legislators are not necessarily on board with what the voters have necessarily said that they wanted, and they're making changes to initiatives that the voters said this is what we support. Well, we live in a representative democracy, and generally speaking, the representatives we elect are supposed to do our will, at least in theory. However, we find sometimes that legislators kind of, they have their own opinion, and they're moved by different political motivations, and sometimes they want to make changes to efforts that the voters have made. To me, I think that's not necessarily fair, because you're not doing what your voters have asked you to do.
Okay, let's get to this point, what the voters ask the people to do and the legislators. I want to get to a couple of these actual propositions, but Maura, we're going to have to come back to you on Proposition 3 on Medicaid expansion, right? Because we started with a potential bill to just repeal it, and that has changed a little bit, but legislators are saying just this week there's a shortfall. All right, so I'm curious how, as someone who worked on Proposition 3, how you're responding to that issue where legislators, you're supposed to do what the people say, but there may be a cost that's not contemplated.
I think we had an interesting data point this week from Utah Policy Daily that re-asked voters, how do you feel about the legislative response? And the majority of people said we're concerned, that we don't know that the legislature specifically on Medicaid expansion is doing what we wanted, what we intended. So there's that point of data. I really appreciate the moderate perspective that Governor Herbert outlined yesterday that says, let's implement. I do appreciate what the legislature is saying about needing to balance their budgets. There's a little bit of a red herring argument in that, in which you see generated from our state government officials. You're seeing that there may, depending on who enrolls, there may be an imbalance in year 3 or maybe year 4. No one sees an imbalance in year 1. So one wonders if wants to restrict implementation in year 1, is that really a prudent economic argument, or is that rather a political argument against the issue? So I sort of would hope that they follow the governor's lead that says implement now. The legislature, rightly so, has the ability to amend and adapt law every year, and we need that, right? I mean, we really do need that. But the bill as it's written will be in the black the first year, will be the will of the people. And the legislature should continue to evaluate it, but I appreciated what Herbert said.
Frank, take these very insightful things. As the one former legislator here, at least so far, okay, you're as a former legislator, if you got handed something like this, is that the most prudent thing to do? Is why don't we see what happens this year, maybe next year, wait until we are?
Well, they got a couple problems. I am completely sympathetic with the legislature on this, because while I believe in a lot of the Medicaid program, but this is what's happening, is they see what's happening in other states, and they're concerned about what's called the woodwork effect, that it goes beyond what's predicted. The second thing is that usually all the time when they have the state budget, they're able to maneuver different things. They can't maneuver. This is what it is, and it's There's a lot of federal implications on it too. So they're trying to figure out, because they know a recession's coming, how do they plan for that? The other thing is there's a lot of programs I fought for as a lawmaker and I fought for as a lobbyist that could be jeopardized in the next couple of years if the Medicaid budget's growing and it's squeezing out other things. They're all looking at that. And they're doing their best to try to balance the budget, deal with all the other requests, and plan for the future. Because the reason why I think the state's so well managed isn't just because we have had good governors. It's also because we had good legislators that plan in the future, say we've got these costs coming down. They're being squeezed this way. They've never had to deal with something like this before, and that's what they're struggling with.
I hear that, Frank, but if we use specificity and not generality, we look at a bill that the citizens decided to tax themselves. So the funding source comes with it, right? So they're not looking for new money. It also does something that's really important, which takes Utah tax dollars that have been going out of our state and brings them back. So it brings back local money, which was, I think, really important. And I think it is important that they look down to the horizon. But you know better than the rest of us that lawmakers are also somewhat mandated to manage in their years of leadership, because they might not be there for other years of leadership. So I think what is prudent policy is to say, yeah, I'll look at this year, I'll look a year down the road. But the woodworking effect does not sneak up on you. It does not happen in a cycle. So to say, hey, and you're looking at the states' generated numbers on this, and the comparisons to other states are showing imbalances. We are so lucky to have a government that has balanced our budget and cares about the fiscal conservative nature of our approach. And that is why we're in the position to be a state that manages this well and receive those federal dollars.
But once you provide those benefits, you're never going to pull them back. So that's what they're looking at, is because once you get them, it's impossible to pull them back. So what they're seeing is if we don't do something, they're just expand and we can't pull them back.
Not to respond too emotionally, because I tend to stay away from that, but that works for all things. But Medicaid expansion is about people. And if it's your family and if it's your mother who's not getting services, the argument that someday I'll want to make that change is not what feeds your soul there at that moment. And citizens were clear on this. So I think those two factors make health care a slightly different issue.
I think there's a part of, okay, I'm going to inject something called, to what Maura was talking about, feeding your soul. Utah has been great at being a community that supports others, particularly those in need. Well, now we're asked to look into our humanity, not altogether just the bottom line dollar effect of this. So we have, what is it, about a $750 million surplus right now? If for some time, not a period of time, hopefully finite, that we look and determine how can we best manage the expansion of Medicaid so that everybody is covered in a way that is prudent but doesn't, drain us. We should figure out a way to spend a little more money in that regard, because, as she said, if you have cancer, if you happen to have an emergency appendectomy and you don't have a job or you don't have insurance, that shouldn't bankrupt you. But we're in a situation now where a lot of families are struggling. They can't pay for prescription drugs. There's all of these things that really affect our quality of life, which we espouse so greatly here. This is one of those opportunities where we can do something that is definitive, that is long-lasting, and that's going to help the vast majority of Utahns.
Okay, let's switch gears, but another thing that impacts Utahns across the board. And Frank, we're going to start with you, because you were the original sponsors of the hate crimes legislation in the 90s. This is back. Maybe talk about a little bit of the history of this that led to today. Let's talk about what some of the current options on the table are.
When I first proposed the hate crimes bill, it was before there was even a Supreme Court decision. I had groups on both the right and the left opposing this. It was a real hard-fought battle. But I have to tell you, one of the groups that was behind me, granted, there was an official position, was the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I take exception to anyone saying that the church is opposed to hate crimes legislation, because they were there with me the whole way. We were able to get something passed. It wasn't perfect. My frustration is that every couple of years, I don't know if it's the prosecutors or law enforcement who we were doing this for to give us tools, said, well, you need to go farther. In my book, just try what we have, because I'm frustrated that it's been 20-some years since I've done this, and we're still arguing about what it looks like.
So let's talk about what those reasons are. Jason, Frank kind of talked about this a little bit. Maybe some say it's maybe too broad, but as we try to give some definitions to that, or try to give some shape to it, that's where we found the resistance.
Well, look, I guess as a minority person, I understand why we have this kind of legislation, and to some degree I favor it, but I also understand that there are already laws in place. But knowing that our society is changing a bit, and I've seen behavior around the country, not necessarily here in Utah, even though I guess we have had instances of hateful behavior where people have been seriously hurt. I think we need to figure out a way to make people understand that this is not behavior that we're going to accept. And if there is an enhanced penalty for acting in that way, in that manner, and that's detrimental to our society, then maybe we should do that. We would want to do that for a police officer. We don't want anyone to think that they can target anybody, and it shouldn't be whether they're, or their race, their ethnicity, or their gender identification, or their sexual orientation.
Let me, Frank, because I want. Oh, go ahead.
What happens is some people say, "Yeah, but you're creating special classes." That's crap. There's nothing more important in this country than making sure that someone is not identified as a victim because of their race, their creed, their color, or sexual orientation. Hate crimes should be the highest priority because nothing is more destructive to the American fabric than a hate crime.
Let me read a quote from the governor from just this week, where he tries to frame that point a little bit. But I want to see what you have to say. And Maura, particularly from the 90s to now, whether or not this has changed a bit. The governor said, and this is monthly news conference, the message we want to put out there is that members of the gay community, LGBTQ, are loved and welcome and appreciated for who they are. They ought to feel safe. They ought to feel loved. So anything we can do to enhance that, we ought to do.
So Jason alluded to this, and I think that this is what the governor's saying. I'm gonna say it in these words that say, this issue has ripened. We've had inclusive, full discussions. It is time now to act. It is time that we go on record as a state about where our values are on hate crimes and where our values are on defending people. And I think the time is ripe now to pass.
Frank, just the last note on this, with what Maura and Jason have put forward, is this what we just heard from the governor? Is this what we've arrived at? Is this something you wouldn't have dreamed of hearing in the past?
I have been in the legislative process for 20-some years. I have never seen where a bill had a special signing ceremony like the anti-discrimination amendments. We're there. The people on Capitol Hill are there. It just has to be packaged right. I mean, I've never been so proud as when that bill was signed into law. And they did it. They didn't do it under the radar. They did it openly and proudly, which tells you where the state is, regardless of religious affiliation or political affiliation.
Let's pull on the thread just a little bit, too, because Representative Maura has introduced a bill that's got a lot of controversy this week, talking about gender and birth certificates. So this bill is going to come up and say, whatever is on your birth certificate, it cannot be changed. Frank? What are the implications of this, and why this particular bill? I'm going to the former legislator on this one.
Merrill Nelson's a very good lawyer. He's a very, very conservative. I believe that he is hearing from different voices on this. This is a bill that, they'll struggle with because of the implications, not just to the community that's going to impact, but also should Utah pass something like this, there may be implications in the corporate world, the business setting, and things like that. And I think a lot of people would ask the question: is it worth all this for what's the gain for preventing people changing the birth certificate? Yeah,
so I'm curious about that end game too, Maura. What are the implications? I guess my question is, why does it matter? Why is that a point?
Why does it matter? I mean, I'm sort of going to push back here a little bit on these kinds of bills. We have 45 days. We have a smart, willing, largely volunteer group of 104 people that I respect their work. Why is this worth it? Why, when we have economic issues and transportation issues and equality issues, do we want to focus on something that I haven't heard a strong legal need for? And at the end of the day, it's asserting a bias and it's asserting an opinion. And you have to ask yourself why, and does it warrant the discussion?
Can I keep the why question going? Jason, the government shut down. Okay. Can we talk about that for just a minute? We're now the longest shutdown in the history of our country, and 2 bills went down in flames just this week. Talk about why you think this line in the sand has been drawn and they will not cross it.
I was talking to a friend of mine 2 days ago, and he's a supporter of the president, and he and I have very, spirited discussions all the time. However, I will say that we are very respectful. So, his mind, he says, the Democrats should say, give him what he wants. Give the president what he wants. And I say to him, well, I understand where you're coming from on that, but if you disagree with the principle, how can you cave in on that? And he doesn't have necessarily a great response because each side is kind of dug in. They feel as though if they cross this line, then they have, not just they have lost, but they have somehow not supported the people who have voted for them. I realize this is, I do find that they can come up with, they should be able to come up with a stopgap so that people get paid, because at some point I do believe there should be an amendment made so that they cannot do this anymore. This should not be the way political fights are solved, and nobody who, the government workers who are being impacted by this, who are not getting paychecks, whose family lives are in just complete disarray and potentially in disaster, this is the most un-American thing you could ever imagine, to take somebody's paycheck from them and they have nothing to do with the fight that you're involved in.
Yeah. Frank, you're about to say something?
Look, if this was a real opportunity, I think if Donald Trump had said, we're going to build the wall, and we're going to use the forced labor of all those cell phone telemarketers to build it. 200 million Americans said, we're there, Mr. President. Both sides, what you have, and I wrote my Deseret News column on this, both sides are being held hostage by the extremist groups, saying if you deviate, we're going to hold you accountable. And it's interesting, the person that had the most recent town hall meeting, Senator Romney, is the one that said, I just got to find a way to solve this, because he's hearing from Utahns, who are very practical people, just open up the government.
Can I read the Romney tweet to Frank's point? And Maura, if you'll listen to this and tell us what you think he is doing, because he voted yes on a Republican bill and a Democrat bill. Okay, his tweet was, Utahns have been clear. End the shutdown and secure the border. I voted today to do both. With both measures having failed, it's time now for Republican and Democratic leaders to come together and negotiate a final deal that funds border security and reopens the government.
Right. So a couple of things. I'm maybe going to go a little higher on what I see that we can make an impact on. First, I think we give a shout out to Senator Romney and a shout out to Representative McAdams, who both said, I want a moderate approach. I want to talk about solutions. But I think undeniably the government is failing us right now. And so the question is, who's influencing them and who are they hearing? And I think more and more we're seeing movements where it is time for average Americans, which see lots of overlap in their life on ideology and don't live in the ideological corners, to start putting that pressure on their legislators and on their elected officials, because otherwise we're going to continue to have failure, because right now it's just ideologically driven.
That's a great point. Jason, the power of us putting our pressure on our elected officials, it's interesting because Utahns, as you poll them, are blaming Democrats and Trump, not just all of our elected officials. It's what's so interesting about it. So how does that pressure finally get to them where maybe like the president starts to feel it or Nancy Pelosi starts to feel it?
I think this is one of those times when we should all stand up for each other. And by that I mean, even though our state is pretty conservative and generally Republican, I feel as though if citizens would make an effort to reach out to their legislators, particularly those in our congressional delegation, and tell them that we want this resolved today. Do it every day if you have to. Fill their email boxes. Call them, because apparently they love that. You know, sure call their offices. Make it known that you want them to resolve this in a way that is reasonable. That again helps secure our borders and offers a solution to those people who are being impacted.
Frank, how do you feel about the line that Senator Romney found here, where just find a way to do it? I'll support the Democrats or I'll support the Republicans.
Well, again, he had a town hall meeting, I think, the day before.
Yeah,
so what he's hearing is just get the government reopened, then talk about this. The average American, I agree with you, if they were talking to their lawmaker more, but they don't have time. You know, they're working, they're paying their mortgages, they're being with their families.
Email them.
Well, I'm just trying to see, the way it works, though, is you have these groups that they're constantly bombarding these members of Congress. That's the advantage of the legislature. They go home every night. They're there on the weekends. They're hearing from the constituents, and when the members of Congress, that's what they're hearing from. To me, the best thing that's got to happen is that at the end of the day, the average person doesn't care what MoveOn.org or what Ann Coulter is saying. They want to know that the government's working for them. I think what's going to happen is more and more businesses can't conduct business as soon as airports start closing, and more we're looking like Mozambique or some other third world country. That's when it's going to just erupt.
Well, sadly, this will resolve when there's damage, right?
Yes.
That's
always what
when
happens.
There's damage, and so that's I think we all foresee that that's what's happening. And then the question is, how do you change the conditions on the ground that it doesn't continue to happen, because I think what we're all worried about is this is the highest upping of the ante of failure, but our dialogue, our statesmanship has been failing for a while.
Let's talk about the letter that Ben McAdams sent, to your point. He sent a letter to Pelosi, one of the Blue Dog Democrats, that said to Nancy Pelosi, just find a way. All right, is that the right strategy in Utah, Frank, for our one Democrat that's representing us in Congress?
Just to find a way. I think by him planting the flag shows that he's pushing his Democratic leaders. A first grader could tell you the way to solve this. You have you fully take care of all the DACA, the 1.2 million, and give them the money for the wall, because that's the only way you're going to get this for both sides.
So that is the one last point I want to leave with Jason too, because that's the proposal from President Trump was really this. All right, give it the wall, and I'll do temporary reinstatement for the Dreamers, for DACA. Right. Tell us where that stalled for just a moment, because the Democrats have been wanting that. Right. They wanted it permanent, not just
permanent. And all of them.
That's where the issue is, right? It was temporary, a non-starter, temporary, and then because especially if you're gonna ask me to do the one thing I don't want to do as a Democrat is to give you this wall that everybody one side espouses is the thing that's going to change everything, and the other side says is the stupidest thing ever. You have to. You can't go half in. You can't just give me a little bit. You got to give me everything I'm asking for if you're asking for in return everything.
What do you think would happen if President Trump said, okay, give me the wall, permanent status for Dreamers? Do you think this thing's done, or do you think the lines are still set so they wouldn't do it?
If you get that, I mean, I don't know if that's what you asked for. You got to own up to yourself and
last comment.
The left and right will still attack it, but what that does, though, that boxes everybody in. Democrats, Republicans, because that is a real deal, and people will really get mad saying, our country's being hurt.
Okay, that's going to have to be the last comment.
The deal maker has to offer it, though.
Okay, we're going to be watching close.
On one side of either it's the speaker or the president needs to offer that, because that will solve it.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the commentary. It's been very insightful. That's it for the Hinckley Report. Please join the conversation online at kued.org/Hinckley Report. Thank you and good night.